It's Tennessee versus Arkansas. It's Nico Iamaleava against Taylen Green. We're going to look at the two quarterbacks and much more here on a Wednesday Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, good Wednesday morning, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Vols. I am your host, Eric Kane. Appreciate you guys being here today. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. You everydayers know that. And a big shout out to our friends over at Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, put in the promo code Locked On College. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase. So we got a lot to get into today. We're going to take a look at the two quarterbacks for Tennessee and Arkansas and how their stats compare and differentiate. Going to look at some impressive stats for Tennessee through the first couple of games of the season, plus what Heather Dinich had to say about Tennessee and the college football playoff chances over at ESPN, and we'll cap off the day with Josh Ward for a little Ward Wednesday action. That is the rundown here for today's show, so let's dive down into it. All right, so we know the stats of, at least Taylen Green and kind of what he's done so far already. He's thrown for the third most yards in the Southeastern Conference to date, 1,236 yards, 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 54% completion percentage, so that's not very high. He's also been the second leading rusher for the Razorbacks behind Jaquindon Jackson, 331 net rushing yards. He's got over 400 yards a game, but of course you can take sacks into consideration there, and he's scored 4 times on the ground via the rushing touchdown. So dual threat quarterback. And he's a guy that can extend plays. He's a guy that when things aren't open, he'll try to, run on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. You got to be mindful of that if you're Tennessee's, defensive line, if you're Tennessee's linebackers, to not allow him to run for a first down. But, overall, he's pretty talented player, but he's a guy that's made a lot of mistakes. He's a guy that has given the football over to the defenses. He's a guy that when you rattle him, you could be getting a treat here in a little bit. And I think that's what Tennessee's defensive line and, of course, Tennessee's front seven is going to try to do an awful lot. All right, so I'm looking at Pro Football Focus here. And, Taylen Green overall in the season, I just read his stats. Taylen Green, I'm going to look at his passing chart, meaning kind of what has he done in certain areas of the football field and how much success has he had doing it. 20 yards down the field. Then I'm going to compare that to Nico Iamaleava of Tennessee. Deep passes, which is 20 yards or more down the field. Taylen Green is 8 for 25, completing at 32% of his passes for 325 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So the completion percentage is obviously way down. And keep in mind here, you take an entire completion percentage, right? You have passes, within 10 yards, 10 to 19 yards, 20 or more yards, whether it's short, medium, long passes, pass behind the line of scrimmage. All that goes into your completion percentage, but obviously throws down the field. There's, when you look at that specific metric, those percentages are going to be down, right? Because they're tougher throws. Well, he's completing 32% of his passes, 25 attempts, 8 completions on deep passes, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Pro Football Focus on that metric grades him out at 74.8, which is not a bad rating. Nico, on the other hand, far fewer passes down the field to date. And again, as I've mentioned several times, I think it's because Tennessee's dictated the way it wants to play. I mean, I say that Oklahoma certainly was getting after Nico, and Tennessee had 2 backup tackles in there. But, Tennessee changed its game plan because of the way its defense was playing and the way that it was running the football at the time. NC State dropped 8, and NC State was like, you're not going to throw it over our head. And Tennessee has said, okay, well, we're going to run it for over 200 yards. So Tennessee has dictated the way, for the most part, the way that the Volunteers want to play, if that makes sense. So you look at what Nico's done, not as many passes down the field. 15 attempts, he's completed 6 of them for a percentage of 40% in terms of completion for those deep passes down the field. 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and his Pro Football Focus grade on that metric is 90.5, and we know that 90 is considered elite, 90 to 100 is considered elite category per Pro Football Focus. So Nico, not as many opportunities, but he's done pretty well on those opportunities. Does have that 1 interception. All right, you'll go back to Taylen Green, midline passing, 10 yards to 19 yards, intermediate passing. This is where the bulk of your throws are going to go if you're a quarterback. Taylen Green has completed 21 of 46 attempts on the season from passes that traveled beyond 10 yards. and before 19 yards, 10 to 19 yards, 398 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Okay, so he's been, pick off heavy a little bit in that regard. Nico, on the other hand, is completing 55% of his passes in that category, 10 to 19 yards, 11 completions on 20 attempts, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Okay, go back to Taylen Green on short passes, 0 to 9 yards. 42 of 61 attempts. So they've thrown a lot more short passes than most teams. Actually, Tennessee's done the same as well. So both of these teams thrown a lot of short passes so far this year through the first 4 to 5 games. 42 of 61, 68% completion, 396 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and that Pro Football Focus grade for Taylen Green's at 89.5. So been very successful in the short game. Still, though, has thrown an interception, whereas Nico has completed 26 of 33 in that regard. Really, really high, 78.8% completion and passes below 9 yards. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And those are Utah passes, screen passes, short little digs there, or not digs, short little hitches there that don't go, beyond 10 yards. That type of stuff, slants, 0 to 9 yards. And then behind the line of scrimmage, Nico's a perfect 18 for 18. And a lot of those as well are some screens behind the line of scrimmage. Utah passes if you're bailing out a little bit, stuff like that. He's a perfect 18 for 18, 127 yards is Nico Iamaleava. And then Taylen Green and passes behind the line of scrimmage, 17 of 19, 117 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Deep left, so 20 yards or more down the field. Let's look at deep passing here and see where he has the most success for Taylen Green. Deep left, 20 yards or more down the field, left hash. Taylen Green is 2 of 6 for 50 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Deep center, middle of the field, he is 4 of 10 for 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. But only 4 of 10, so 40% completion. And then deep right, 2 of 9. 2 of 9 from deep right, 22% completion, no touchdowns, no interceptions for 65 yards. You look at Nico, he's found a lot of success throwing left down the field, deep down the field, 20 yards or more. 3 of 5 in that category, 60%, 146 yards. Center, deep middle, something that was not in Tennessee's offense whatsoever. Last year it felt like. Nico, only 3 attempts, 20 yards or more down the middle of the field, but 2 of 3. Okay, 66%, 103 yards and 1 touchdown. And then deep right, 1 of 7. That's where Nico struggled on the right side, 20 yards or more down the field. Only 1 of 7 for 53 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So that's kind of where Nico's looked like at this point in time. Big thing about Nico is he's not turned the football over, whereas Taylen Green has made a habit of it. Again, sure, you might want to be mindful in the pocket, but I'm not going to give those turnovers, those strip sack fumbles, I'm not going to put those on Nico. I'm putting those on your offensive linemen, your offensive tackles, and your running backs for not kind of helping out in that regard. That's, just kind of my opinion, more so than Nico. You want to have that internal clock, don't get me wrong, but I think it's more or less about the protection than anything. And then Taylen Green, you look at the season overall and just kind of looking at a stat line here. I'll share my screen if you're watching on YouTube. Let's see here. So you see this. Against Arkansas Pine Bluff, you can't really take much of this into consideration. They won 70-0. Taylen Green was 16 of 23, 229 yards, 2 touchdowns. He ran the football 6 times for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. Had a combined 4 touchdowns, no turnovers. But again, that's like Tennessee playing Kent State. Against Oklahoma State, where the offense was aplenty, but only scored 30 points or 30, however many points in regulation. 26 of 45, only completed 57% of his passes, 416 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Against UAB, he had a really bad game against an inferior opponent. Arkansas won 37-27, but he was only 11 of 26 passing, 42%. That is not good. 161 yards, 1 interception. He did rush for 17 attempts, 96 yards, and 2 touchdowns, so he had a lot of success on the ground in that game. Get into SEC play, win at Auburn, 24-14 win at Auburn. He was 12 of 27, which isn't great, 44% completion, 151 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. He ran the ball 18 times for 80 yards. Again, look at these rushing numbers here. And in 4 of 5 games this season, Taylen Green has accumulated over 10 carries. 18 carries, 17 carries, 18 carries, and then last week against A&M, he had 13 carries for 6 yards. Didn't have a whole lot of success there. Did have a long of 24. Remember, sacks are involved here. But he was 23 of 41, 56% completion, 279, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So again, you can see there's some talents there. You can see that he certainly, has ability. But it's about putting it all together. And you've heard you've heard Sam Pittman in press conferences already this week kind of talk about the confidence level for him. It feels like just hearing his comments that he doesn't have a whole lot of confidence in his quarterback. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to feel good about going into a big game if I don't have a whole lot of confidence in my quarterback. But that's Taylen Green so far this season. Ability's there. I think it's a nice fine-tuned warm-up match for Jalen Milroe down the line. But don't hear me wrong here. You can't just walk into Arkansas and assume that you're going to get this win and assume you're going to shut him down. I think because of his playmaking ability, this is going to be the most talented quarterback Tennessee's seen to date. And somebody jumped in my comments the other day, and I've said this over and over again as well. Give Tennessee's defense credit for making Grayson McCall look mediocre, for forcing Jackson Arnold to the bench in the second quarter against Oklahoma. Give Tennessee's defense credit, and I will. But on paper, this is a quarterback that's accomplished the most to date that Tennessee will face. Now, again, the turnover issues are abundant. He does turn the football over, and that's going to be up to Tennessee's front seven to get after it and make something happen. So I'm looking at Taylen Green. I'm looking at Nico Iamaleava. I like Nico a lot more, obviously. Small sample size, only 4 games for Nico. Only 4 games compared to the 5 games for Taylen Green, but I think Nico's going to be hitting a stride here pretty soon. And, once Nico goes off, James Pierce has got half a sack on the season. Tennessee played 2 backup tackles the majority of the game on the road at Oklahoma. What else? Squirrel White hasn't gotten going yet. You're starting Will Brooks at safety. I mean, look at all these things that are kind of going against Tennessee in the fans' perspective. Yet you have 2 ranked wins. You have 2 wins away from Neyland Stadium. You're 4-0, and you're number 4 in the AP poll. It's not bad. It's not bad whatsoever. Hey, when we come back, we'll look at some impressive stats on how Tennessee's been dominant to date so far this season, and look at an interesting article over at ESPN.com from Heather Dinich on how Tennessee needs to win at both Georgia and against Alabama to solidify their stance in the college football playoff. I don't know about that. That's coming up next as we continue on here with a Wednesday edition of Locked On Vols. Stay tuned. I want to tell you guys about the Game Time app. Game Time is an app to where you can go and buy tickets to events in your area. It could be a sporting event at Neyland Stadium, football game. Could be a basketball game at Thompson Bowling Arena, the Food City Center, at the new renovated Lindsey Nelson Stadium this spring for the national champion baseball team. Or it could be a concert at Neyland Stadium. Could be a concert at TBA FCC. Could be a show at the Bijou. Could be at the Tennessee Theater, Tennessee Smokies in the spring. You can buy tickets to not only sporting events, but to concerts and all those events in your area by downloading the Game Time app or going to gametime.co. But download that Game Time app, put in the promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, you can create that account, put in the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. You can see the Game Time's lowest price guarantee, ticket coverage, seats views, so you know exactly what you're paying for, plus the all-in pricing to where it's a feature that shows you the total up front, no surprise fees at checkout, all that and more on the Game Time app. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Hey guys, welcome back into your Wednesday show. Appreciate you everydayers for being here, making Locked On Vols a part of your morning routine. You can watch us, listen to us, all that for free. Available wherever you get your podcasts. We got Josh Ward for Word Wednesday coming up in segment number 3. Okay, a couple of stats I wanted to get out here before we get out of the way and get to Josh, and before we take a look at some ESPN article from Heather Dinich on Tennessee's college football playoff chances. Esteemed sports information director for football over at Tennessee, Bill Martin, he put out a series of tweets a couple of days ago, and pretty mind-blowing to look at it like this. So Bill Martin tweets, heading into the second straight night SEC road game, Vol football ranks top 5 in the FBS in these categories. Scoring offense, first, 54 points per game. Total defense, first, allowing 176 yards per game. Third down defense, first, 17%, meaning Tennessee's defense are holding opponents to a 17% clip on third downs. Scoring defense, second, 7 points. Rushing defense, second, 50 yards allowed per game. Total offense, third at 565.8 yards of total offense. Kick return defense, third at 5 yards on average allowed. Pass defense, fourth at 125.3 yards per allowed. And rush offense, fourth in the nation at 290 yards on the ground per game on average. Again, UTC and Kent State kind of inflate those. But Tennessee to be in the top 5 and to be leading the nation in a number of these big-time categories, I think that's pretty impressive. Another tweet from Bill Martin. Through the first 4 games of the season, Vol football has scored 218 points. That's the most in modern school history through the first 4 games. Modern history, this one goes since 1933. Pre-modern record is 237 points, and that was back in 1914. Don't even ask me what constitutes as modern era and this modern era, because I was reading off a stat a couple weeks ago, and the modern era was 1937, I thought. But I guess the modern era in this case is 1933. But anyway, it's a school record, modern era school record, 218 points scored in the first 4 games of the season, but not the most in the first 4 games all told. Back in 1914, the Volunteers scored 237, back when they played with leather helmets, or maybe no helmets at all. Another one here, 28 points allowed. That's the fewest allowed by a UT defense through the first 4 games since 1966, where Tennessee allowed just 20 points to be scored through the first 4 games. It's not bad. It's not bad whatsoever. Tennessee is getting it done. No doubt about it. All right, so those are a couple of stats. One other one, I saw this on Twitter from Dan Harrelson over at USA Today Network, or USA Wire, excuse me. Per UT, Tennessee is one of 4 FBS football teams to have not trailed this season, joining Texas, Indiana, and Army. The Vols have not trailed in 24 straight quarters, dating back to last season's regular season finale against Vanderbilt. We knew that lead for the Commodores was short-lived, however. But Tennessee's led for 24 straight quarters and is one of 4 teams nationally to not trail in a football game this season, along with Texas, Indiana, and Army. Again, small sample size, but anytime you're doing stuff like this, and it hasn't been done since 1933 or 1924, or you're one of 3 or 4 teams in the country so far this season that have done this or that, it's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive for sure. I do want to highlight one other thing before we get to Josh Ward. This is a story over at ESPN.com from Tuesday. And essentially it says Tennessee needs to beat Alabama and Georgia to, quote, avoid a true debate for a playoff spot. It was a story by Heather Dinich over at ESPN, okay? And this is what she says. Quote, Tennessee still has to play Alabama and Georgia. And we saw just how that unfolded in Tuscaloosa this past weekend. The Vols need to go 2-0 against those teams to avoid a true debate in the committee meeting room. My response to that? Well, no duh. No blank, right? I mean, of course, if you're undefeated with wins over Georgia and Alabama, you are 100% in the college football playoff at a place like Tennessee. So if you lose those 2 games, of course there's going to be some type of debate, but us here on Locked On Vols, we believe Tennessee's going to have the resume to back up its merit in the college football playoff. Again, that's, conversation for down the line, but duh, of course. I mean, that's kind of when I saw that quote on social media, I'm like, well, okay, of course. She goes on to say, without those wins, Tennessee will be counting on wins against NC State and Oklahoma to impress the committee enough for an at-large bid. I hear you there, okay? NC State's been a letdown so far, but they continue to win, albeit in an ugly way, more so than not. Oklahoma continues to win. It's not dominant by any stretch of the imagination. Oklahoma's still in the top 25. I hear you. Those are not 2 powerhouses. I understand that. Tennessee so far needs both NC State and Oklahoma to continue to win. I get all that. But what's Kentucky going to look like down the line? Okay, Kentucky upset Ole Miss. Kentucky took Georgia all the way to the wire. It's got 2 losses. I recognize that. I don't understand the South Carolina loss, but what's Kentucky look down the wire? I'm trying to think of some other teams on the schedule that could potentially, help Tennessee, and I can't really think of anybody else. Can't bank on Florida. Can't bank on Mississippi State. Can't bank on Vanderbilt. Can't bank on UTEP. So you're really going to have to bank on Kentucky and winning that game, of course, but Kentucky maybe helping you out a little bit, and then NC State and Oklahoma. But my question is, what if Tennessee wins one of those games? Well, yeah, there still might be a smidge of a debate, But at 11-1, there shouldn't be a debate if you lose to Georgia on the road, or if you lose to Alabama, the number one team in the country right now at home, but you beat Georgia on the road. There shouldn't be a debate, in my opinion. Heather Dinich goes on to say, Tennessee had a bye week entering Saturday, ranked number 2 in the country in ESPN strength of record metric after wins against Oklahoma and NC State. The Vols were number 1 in the country in total efficiency, matching the statistics with the resume and building their case as one of the most complete teams in the country. Tennessee's wins against Oklahoma and NC State, the highlights of the resume so far, continue to hold value as both opponents won their respective games in Week 5. She goes on to say, before this, a note about ESPN's projected playoff bracket this past week has Vols as number 6 seed hosting the first-round game in Knoxville against number 11 Michigan. That pretty much says that Tennessee is not going to win the SEC, and Tennessee's not going to be the runner-up, and that's kind of what Heather Dinich writes there. Quote, this shows how different the seeding can be from the committee's ranking on Selection Sunday. Remember, the Power 4 conference winners get the first four spots, right? Quote, as Tennessee was ranked number 3 because seeds 1 through 4 are reserved for conference champs, the SEC runner-up earns the number 5 seed. The Vols get bumped to number 6. She continues to say they would still earn a first-round home game, but a bye isn't out of the question moving forward. According to ESPN's research, Tennessee joins Texas and Alabama as the only SEC teams with at least a 15% chance of earning a first-round bye. So again, Tennessee's in good position, but going back to the whole headline of the story here, Tennessee needs to beat both Alabama and Georgia to, quote, avoid a true debate for a playoff spot. Of course there's going to be a debate if Tennessee loses that game. But at 10-2, depending on what they look like in that game, coming from the SEC, and I still think Tennessee's record, their resume is going to look decent enough in terms of efficiency, in terms of strength, in terms of all that type of stuff. I think that's going to be enough to get Tennessee in the college football playoff. Of course, it's impossible to say here on October the 2nd, but we will see. And if Tennessee splits that series, Tennessee's in. If Tennessee sweeps, Tennessee's in. If Tennessee goes winless in that 2-game series, well, sure, of course there's going to be a conversation. But 10-2, Ole Miss with a loss to Kentucky and Georgia, Ole Miss isn't getting in. Ole Miss has got to upset. Ole Miss has got to win every game on the schedule remaining to get into the 12-team playoff after that loss to Kentucky. So I thought that was interesting. Wanted to bring it on to the show and react a little bit. Hey, when we come back, Josh Ward will join us for a little Ward Wednesday segment as we continue on here with a Wednesday edition of Locked On Vols. Stay tuned. What to say about our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out all the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Getting started, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's over at FanDuel.com. Again, I've been scrolling the bottom ticker here on the show today. Tennessee is a 13.5-point favorite. The total is at 60.5. We love the over in this football game, and we like Tennessee to cover that 13.5 because all told, Tennessee is the better football team, and if Tennessee goes on the road and does what it needs to do, handles the environment pretty well, runs the football, and forces bad decisions for Taylen Green, Tennessee should have no problem covering that spread, in my opinion. So put some coin in your pocket this NFL Sunday, but also on Saturday with college football as well, all on the safe, friendly, easy-to-use app over at FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel, it's America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, it's where you can make every moment more. We call this segment every single week Ward Wednesday. Josh Ward, co-host of Josh and Swain on 99.1 The Sports Animal, former host a long time ago of Locked On Vols. Every single Wednesday, segment number 3, we talk to our buddy Josh Ward. Josh, 4-0 Vols, #4 in the country, both in the coaches and in the AP. I believe it's the second time under the Josh Heupel regime that he's had a Tennessee team ranked in the top 5, if I'm not mistaken. Nonetheless, getting back in action this week. Well, what did you do on your bye week with no Tennessee football?
Well, I watched football. I watched the Georgia-Alabama game with great interest. I watched Ole Miss-Kentucky with great surprise. I watched Oklahoma-Auburn kind of go the way that I thought it would, just didn't know which team would win it that way. And it's about right. Oklahoma getting the win, and then did a bunch of stuff with my kids. So it was good, action-packed weekend without Tennessee football, but glad that Tennessee's back in action this week.
Did you learn anything, or maybe did your outlook on what you think Tennessee can accomplish this year, any of that change from this past weekend, seeing the way Georgia was getting throttled at points in time, seeing the way Alabama held on to win that game, seeing Ole Miss get upset, seeing Kentucky look pretty decent? How did that affect Tennessee football in your eyes, if any at all?
It did not. It was a reminder, maybe watching the Ole Miss Kentucky game, that anything can happen. So that's why assuming Tennessee will just show up in Fayetteville and get an easy win is not the right approach. Tennessee's a big favorite, and Tennessee is expected to go there and get a win. But if Tennessee makes mistakes, if Tennessee struggles on third downs like Ole Miss did, if Tennessee turns the football over and doesn't force turnovers on the defensive side, then the Vols could have trouble at Arkansas. Looking at the Georgia-Alabama game, nothing changed about my opinion in that I think Tennessee will have a good chance to beat Alabama, and it will also be very difficult to beat Alabama because Jalen Milroe has taken a big step that I thought he could maybe under Kalen DeBoer's leadership, and Ryan Williams is spectacular as a talent.
Do you know he's 17?
That's what I've heard. Yeah, that's what I've heard. And Georgia, anybody writing that off as, oh, that won't be too difficult going to Athens needs to be really careful in doing something like that. So the schedule I thought at the beginning of the season would be favorable for Tennessee. After 4 games, I think it's as favorable as we thought, maybe more so. But Tennessee still has to go out there and prove what it can do against the best teams and make sure that it handles its business against the teams that are lesser opponents.
Yeah, and I've only been covering Tennessee football games kind of on a game-by-game basis for a couple of years now, like traveling and whatnot. But, I mean, I've only been to Athens one time. I guess what I'm trying to say is I haven't been everywhere, but the one time I went to Georgia in 2022, undefeated teams playing for a spot in the SEC championship, like that was as loud as I've ever heard a stadium. Now, I've been to Neyland, for some of those loud games, but a lot of those loud games I'm in the press box for. So, and you know how that is. I mean, you can feel it, and you can hear it a little bit, but you're not out there, so it's kind of a different feel. Georgia was an open air press box, but that was so loud you couldn't even hear yourself think. And that environment's going to be twofold this year when Tennessee gets in there in November, especially if Tennessee's undefeated, coming off wins over Alabama on the third Saturday in October, handling business against Kentucky and Arkansas like it should. So yeah, it's still going to be a very, very challenging game. I thought Ole Miss was always a tad bit overrated. I didn't think that schedule helped them out a lot. I have no clue about Kentucky, Josh. I mean, who are the Wildcats getting throttled by South Carolina, taking Georgia all the way to the end, and then upsetting Ole Miss? I have no clue who Kentucky is.
Well, they're mentally tough to respond the way that they did after the loss against South Carolina, and also having a disappointing loss against Georgia, because that's a game that Kentucky had a shot to win, came up short, and they kept fighting to get better. And they went to Ole Miss and won and made plays late on both sides of the football. So ton of credit to the coaching staff and the players. Tennessee will still line up with a talent advantage against Kentucky. Tennessee will have 2 weeks to get ready for that game when it takes place in early November, because the second bye week for Tennessee this season falls in front of that Kentucky game. Another example of why I think the schedule is favorable, because Tennessee just straight up with Kentucky should have an advantage, but there's no, quick turnaround from another game. Tennessee will have 2 weeks to get ready for the Wildcats and should absolutely win. But let's see Tennessee's offensive line. The tackle position is a question mark coming out of the first month of the season. What if they deal with injury? Kentucky has some guys up front. Walker is a big-time player. So the Vols will be a big favorite, I think, in that game. Yeah. It's just a reminder that Ole Miss was a big favorite against Kentucky. Being a big favorite does not guarantee anything aside from games like UTEP and Kent State. When the ball kicked off against Kent State, it was over. Tennessee won the game. They had to show up and they would win. But that's not the case. That's not exactly how it works in the SEC.
Could you have played cornerback, not quarterback, cornerback against Kent State, and would your team still win? Would Tennessee still win?
Oh, yeah. Before the game, I had somebody ask, hey, could we still beat Kent State if Nico didn't start? I was like, so they'd be starting Gaston or Merklinger? I'm like, yeah. Yes, Tennessee would have won by, 40, 50 points with one of those guys. Tennessee could have started Navy Schuler, and I don't mean this as any knock on Navy. They could have started Navy Schuler, and they would have won the game with ease. So, that's another conversation. But Tennessee is at a point where, because of the line of scrimmage, everything we talked about before the season and during September, that's still why I love Tennessee's chance in every game. Not as much the Georgia game as Arkansas or Kentucky. But in terms of having a shot to go out there, what they have up front on defense gives them a better shot than what we talked about 2 years ago. And the Tennessee-Alabama game is going to be great to watch up front. Tennessee's defensive line against an Alabama offensive line that looks better than a year ago and held its own against Georgia. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch on October 19th.
Let's look at Arkansas now. Let's look at quarterback Taylen Green. Now, I think that he, and I said this all week long, the listeners are probably getting tired of hearing this, but I think he'll be the best challenge that Tennessee's seen so far. Give Tennessee's defense credit because that was not Grayson McCall. It was not Jackson Arnold. Of course, it's not UTC or Kent State's quarterback. Taylen Green can do some things. He'll also make some silly mistakes and throw the football over. He's got upside, but also he makes a whole lot of mistakes, and he's not very consistent right now. But he's a very mobile quarterback. Do you think this is a great – and Tennessee's got to handle business. Don't get me wrong. I'm with you. You can't just walk into Fayetteville and soon you're going to get a win. Have you watched college football lately? So take care of business. Don't get me wrong, but – do you think this is a great opening act or a great preview for defending a Jalen Milroe here in a couple weeks, knowing that they're not completely the same players, but they do share a lot of the skill sets, but Milroe's just on a different planet than that of Taylen Green?
Yeah, Green is a big athlete that can make some plays and can cause some problems and can challenge Tennessee's defensive ability in keeping contained and trying to force plays against Arkansas, because you're right, Green will give the ball up, and that's part of the reason that I'm still really confident Tennessee will go win the game this week, is that we've seen Arkansas get in its own way, and Tennessee's defense does a great job of getting in the way. That's a favorable combination for Tennessee, but let's see. Green and Arkansas have been able to move the football up and down the field. The word or the term should have in sports can often be overused, but Arkansas put itself in a position where it should have walked out of there with a win, and it should feel that way. But it didn't because of mistakes made, and Oklahoma State took advantage. I think Tennessee will do that too. But sure, in terms of Tennessee's going to see Jalen Milroe a couple of weeks later, who right now might be the biggest threat, the most dangerous weapon you're going to see at quarterback in college football, a Heisman Trophy favorite. Green is he's a nice warm-up for that. The real test will be Bama. I think we both recognize that. Everybody should recognize it. But Green is a better test, I think, than what Tennessee has seen at quarterback so far this season.
Yeah, and, it'll be a challenge for Tennessee's linebackers to, have eyes on him when he gets out of the pocket, tuck and run. Tennessee's ends to not allow him to get out of the pocket. Tennessee's defensive linemen to make tackles when he tries to, squirt up through the middle of the offensive line. It's going to be a challenge. And in the run game as well, where it's a big point of emphasis at Monday's media availability with Josh Heupel and players. I asked Josh Heupel about the run game specifically and Jaquindon Jackson, who I'm going to ask you about now. But, Heupel responded by saying, well, Taylen Green makes him right so many different times, because when you have a mobile quarterback or a guy that's threatened to run, he makes those numbers light on the other side for handing it off to a running back. So a big challenge for Tennessee's front seven for sure in this one. Let's go to Jackson. Huge transfer from Utah, leading the SEC in rushing. I think we both can agree if Dylan Sampson, who leads the SEC in rushing yards per game, were to have played all available quarters and didn't have a bye week, he would be up there. But nonetheless, Jackson's been a really, really good player. They've run the football, Arkansas, really, really well. Throwing the football has been kind of a different story. A lot of yards there for Taylen Green, but not a whole lot of production and some turnovers. But running the football has been good. What have you seen for Jaquindon Jackson, one of the two huge impact transfers that Arkansas kind of started over with on offense this year?
Yeah, I mean, they've played Texas A&M, which is well coached, and they played Oklahoma State. Mentioned that a few minutes ago. So they faced a nice, tough test to start the season. Auburn the week before Texas A&M. So they've played three quality power conference teams in terms of the defense that Auburn would face. Still the toughest test for him coming up. I'm sure getting out on the edge is part of the conversation. That comes back to what you mentioned with what Tennessee's focus will be on the defensive side, because I have a hard time believing many teams, we'll see with Bama and Georgia, but that they're going to be able to have a lot of success in between the tackles. So getting out on the edge, and Green comes back into play in this conversation. He has to. Making things right, I mean, that applies to, I think, Dylan Sampson, what he's able to do in the offense, and with Nico being at least a threat. So it just always applies, and Tennessee's having that conversation this week against Arkansas, and if they're able to early on have some running success and pick up some first downs and move the football, and build some confidence and create some confusion on Tennessee's defensive side, then maybe Arkansas gives itself a shot there. That's why getting stops. Yeah, Tennessee, I mentioned taking the ball away. Tennessee doesn't have to have a huge edge in the turnover margin. It would actually probably go the other way. Arkansas is thinking we need to have the huge edge. If Tennessee can just slow down Arkansas and not allow them to move the football up and down the field, then Tennessee's offense should be able to turn around and do enough against Arkansas.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like Arkansas at Auburn 2 weeks ago where the Hogs forced 5 turnovers, and that's the reason they won that football game.
Mm-hmm.
You always want to win the turnover battle. You never want to turn the football over for your team, but certainly I'm with you. I mean, just from a physical standpoint, from where you're at the line of scrimmage, roster development, all that, I mean, Tennessee shouldn't have to win the turnover battle by a huge margin to win the football game, but hey, you will take that for sure. A lot of Tennessee and Arkansas preview coming up on Josh and Swain, noon to 3 all week long on 99.1 The Sports Animal, and of course on the Josh and Swain newsletter every Friday morning. You guys can sign up for that newsletter. It's in the show description right now. Anything I left out, Josh? What do you and VFL Jason Swain have going on this week?
Yeah, just how Tennessee can actually get better, because they're 4-0, but anybody thinking the Vols have proven they're the best team or that they're perfect, that's not the case. We had a good conversation at the end of last week with Jonathan Wade, former Tennessee cornerback, is a teammate of Swain, played in the NFL, does some coaching at the youth level, and he saw Tennessee in person in August, was here for about a week during camp. He was really good talking about the secondary, the defense, what he likes about Tennessee, and what they need to do to improve. So big 3-game stretch coming up, covering it on the show 12 to 3, and then the newsletter, which I appreciate you promoting.
And it's Josh Ward. Follow him on Twitter at Josh_Ward. Josh, as always, man, thanks so much.
You got it. Thanks, Eric.
All right, that is going to do it here for this edition of Locked On Vols. Can't thank you enough for being here, making Locked On Vols your first listen, your first watch, each and every single day. Shout out everydayers for spreading the word about this show. That's how we continue to grow. And of course, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Download and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll continue to look ahead to Tennessee and Arkansas, all that and more right here on Locked On Vols.